Orientation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show.
Reed and I just had a great conversation with Fritz Kulo from Kezzler. And he took us through what Digital Product Passport is. I had a thought in my head and what it might be. And it's so much more. It can enable a lot of different use cases from a regulatory perspective and also a consumer and user perspective, and how to get data across and through the supply chain in a more thoughtful way. And the importance of clean data and having data available for all of the supply chain to become more interoperable and efficient. So hope you enjoy the episode. It was a pleasure to record with Fritz.
Well, Fritz, welcome to the show. We're really glad you could spend some time with us today.
Reed, thank you for having me. This is very exciting.
Yeah, we're going to get into digital product passports today. But before we do that, can you just give us a little background on yourself and Kezzler and what you do for Kezzler?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to. So Kezzler is a company, is a Norwegian company that specializes in serialization and traceability. And those are terms I'm sure are very familiar to the audience today, obviously. And our origin story, like any good origin story, has equal parts tragedy and genius. And the tragedy is that, at the turn of the century, there was a plane crash with substantial loss of life. Obviously, a very tragic incident. And the investigation found that the reason cause for that incident was unfortunately counterfeit bolts that had been used to assemble certain parts in the plane. That's unfortunately something that became fairly common throughout some industrial applications as well. And that got our founder thinking, a gentleman, a very brilliant gentleman by the name of Magnar Løken. And he got to thinking, well, geez, there must be a way to be able to authenticate the components that go into building such a critical piece of equipment. And so he came up with the idea of assigning digital identities to different products that would be individualized, so you could really ascertain the authenticity of the product, and around that identity really encapsulate additional information that you may need for that verification process to take place, and build, if you want a pedigree of that. And that actually happens to be around the same time where California was talking about e-pedigree, as we all remember, 20 years ago. And at the same time as the Auto ID MIT lab was really maturing and developing this notion of the Internet of Things. So you could say that Kezzler was there from the very beginning of those conversations. But as Magnar began to take a look at how to do this, he realized very quickly that if you're going to have a universe of hundreds of millions, if not billions of products that are identified, then that ID management becomes a very complex process, not really something that people think of very often. I know you guys do, right? But then not only does the ID management process become complicated, but also the exponential growth in data throughout the supply chain and throughout the life cycle of the product, not only for that specific product, but as that evolves over the years, results in certain issues that you have to handle in terms of data management and lag and access and retrieval of that information. So that is really where my story intersects with Kezzler. And I'm gonna take us on a tangent, but I actually spent quite a bit of time in Latin America. I spent part of my childhood in Latin America. And I came into contact by then by a project that I was fascinated by, which is called Project CyberSyn, which is something that I think is not really known here in North America. And we're talking about 1970s Chile. And we have to abstract ourselves from sort of the politics and everything else that was going on at the time. But the idea behind that project was the first concept that I can think of a connected economy, where the idea was we're going to take pieces of data from the mines, from the workers, from production, from all these different bits and pieces that make up what nowadays we'll call an efficient supply chain, and use it to drive near real-time information and management, and sort of drive what nowadays also we'll call predictive analytics and predictive analysis and stuff like that. And very quickly, I mean, they realized that there were massive technical hurdles to do that. First of all, because they were using very outdated hardware, even by the time the project was completed. But there was just very, very a lot of difficulties in terms of them being able to access data and leverage that data. So I was fascinated by the idea of, we can take data and just use that data to improve how things run, right? Across the economy, across the supply chain. And through sheer serendipity, many years later, I ended up working in the space of serialization and traceability. And I saw the same things come up in terms of proper identity management, proper data management, and sort of the scalability of the efficiency process that correlates to that entire digitization of supply chain. And a gentleman came to me and said, "Hey, Fritz, I know this company in Norway. They're looking into that space. They're looking into this problem. So I think just go and talk to them." And I got onto a plane to Oslo. That's 12 years ago. I met with Magna Luken, and then as I say, the rest is history. So that's really I've been with us for the last 12 years and have never looked back.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a really cool story.
That's a really cool story. And to be honest, I'm so glad that somebody took a look at counterfeit bolts. Who would think about making counterfeit bolts, counterfeit purses, right? From a female's perspective. But anyway, that's a really cool story. And I love how you were taken with it as a young person, and then now you're doing all of this work. That's really cool. I want to go back to something Reed said in the introduction about digital product passport. Can you just take us through what that is, and why it was created?
Yeah, so as we understand nowadays, right? So the term digital product passport really comes out of the European Union, and it was really something that came out of the European Union Commission's policies that were written in 2020. And then they would eventually become ratified by the European Parliament, and they would make their way into what is nowadays the European Climate Law, which was ratified in June 2021. And as part of those policies, really, the objectives of those policies are to drive the sustainability of the European economy. I mean, broadly speaking, they aim to reduce greenhouse emissions by 55% by 2030s relative to 1990s levels, and then achieve carbon neutrality by the 2050s. And of course, as you can imagine, as obviously the name implies, there's some pretty ambitious objectives around sustainability, recycling, circularity, ethical sourcing, right, to be able to drive those changes. And what they realize is that in order to drive those changes, there really needs to be a data and information component. And that's really where that DPP comes in, because they realize they have to have two things to do this. The first one is we have to have trusted data as to how this product made, where is this product coming from. But then we need to be able to share that data with the different actors of the supply chain, because nowadays we don't really have a fully vertically integrated supply chain. We have matrices and with different actors throughout the supply chain, and they have to be able to share that information, right? And that's really what DPP is. Right? DPP, in essence, is this idea that you're going to assign an identity to a product, and then you're going to use that identity to collate a whole bunch of information that relates to all these different buckets, right? So where that is the sourcing and origination of the product, the supply chain information, recyclability, sourcing, and so on and so forth. So it's not only necessarily just a backwards looking process as to where has this product been, but it's a process that is also meant to enable forward-looking processes such as recycling, if you will. And now, what that data is and how that data is encapsulated may differ depending on different industries. So this is not something you can say, oh well, there's one DPP and then that's it. That was codified in the 2021 climate law, and then we're done. All you have to do is read that. No. So the reality is that this is going to be phased in different industries. It's going to be staggered. So, each industry may have slightly different requirements. I mean, the general concept is going to be the same. You're going to have some form of unique identity, and you're going to have to collect some information, but that information may change. And right now we have, if you want, the main three. The first one, which is already in place, which is related to batteries, predominantly aimed, obviously, at the EV industry, which basically states that by 2026, batteries must have individually identified QR code, batteries above 2 kilowatt, and associate a lot of this information that we discussed, and also use that also to collect information as to the status and performance of the battery throughout this life cycle. The second one that's coming out now, I believe, in Q2 of this year, I think it is for textiles, and then we're going to have a draft for toys in Q4 of this year, and then there's going to be some additional industries that are going to be coming in. So this is a space that's going to be evolving. It's not necessarily because you're looking at one particular industry that is going to be a complete replica into the rest of the other industries.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I was just over at our global forum in Brussels, and We had 111 countries come together, and we were talking about this. And as you said, this is an EU, solution. This is the European Union has put together the DPP, or Digital Product Passport, and they've ratified this, and they're starting to push this out. And batteries are the first one. But in the United States, we have a lot of manufacturers that sell products globally, right? We don't have it here in the US right now. It's not required. However, if you want to play over there, you're going to have to start working in this space. So we really feel it's important to start talking about it and start understanding it and to get involved and to, really bring some of your best practices, to these conversations. So you mentioned with batteries being first, and you mentioned the good old QR code that's going on there. And I say good old, for a lot of folks it's new, but for some folks it's been around for quite a long time. But maybe let's talk a little bit about the impact of technology and innovation. And then, maybe is data going to be more accurate? Is there going to be, more challenges? If maybe you could talk to that just a little bit for us.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think there's, to sort of use a cliche, there's a lot to unpack there, right? So,
Yes.
So let's begin, I think, maybe with your last point, right, on the data. So I think that there's a couple of things that we have to discuss. The first one is, I think in the public imagination, there's this prevailing idea that our modern supply chains operate as some form of perfect panopticon, right, where the main brand has perfect information and knowledge of what's going on throughout the supply chain. And everybody's sharing all this great information, sort of like Minority Report-ish type style information, right? And I think the reality is it just couldn't be further from the truth. That's something that we have to grapple with. And so when you look at what's going on with data, the first thing is, well, we need to have a way to acquire that data, right? We don't know what we don't know, and there's a lot that we don't know currently. The other thing, when we're really dealing with issues of sustainability and sort of ethical sourcing and recycling and stuff like that, is to use a phrasing, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So we're trying to move to acquire raw materials in much more sustainable ways. The only way we're going to be able to do that is by collecting the actual data and using that data to drive the changes that we want to see within the supply chain. So I think that's sort of like the first piece, being able to collect that data to drive more efficient supply chains. And connected to that, Rockwell Automation did a survey last year. They polled over 300 supply chain professionals that really deal with this issue of traceabilities, and say, hey, what do you really think about this whole issue of unique identities, serialization, digital transformation in supply chains? And 80% of them said, yes, absolutely. This is absolutely key. It's a key concept to drive the transformations of our supply chains and to drive more efficiency. Right. So I think that it's a natural discussion that is evolving, and it begins with acquiring the data. And it's not just, when we talk about big data, then it becomes, well, big data is not about the data. Big data is about what that data enables you to do. So I think that there's definitely going to be transformations that occur as a result of this.
How do you talk to organizations? Because I think what you said is so true. We don't know the data in the supply chain. It is not Minority Report. I think there is definitely a thought, though, that it is that the data is there and everybody knows what it is and where it is. So how, when you're working with folks, these battery organizations or textiles and soon to be toys, because when you start talking about data quality, I've seen this with my own eyes roll in the back of their head. Ugh, we don't need to talk about it. It's not important. But how is something like the Digital Product Passport and these regulations in the EU, is it opening eyes to the importance of data quality, or is it this ongoing conversation that you never can stop having?
I think it's opening a lot of eyes, and obviously it's an expanding conversation. It's an evolving conversation. They're happening now in North America. So the first one is, I think last year, Cali, PA came up with a report to the California Congress, looking specifically at the issues of, how do we recycle and repurpose all these batteries that will be coming up, right? And IPA within this report basically says, we should really be looking at emulating what's going on with DPP in Europe as it pertains to the batteries, right? So obviously there's that conversation on the regulatory space that's happening, and then we can also link this to the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually has provisions within the Inflation Reduction Act that tie the tax credits to the composition of materials, or rather, not the composition, but the source of the materials that go into making the batteries and battery packs. I mean, it starts with 40% within now need to come from either the United States or countries, friendly countries to the United States. And that increases to, I believe, 80% by, I believe it is 2026. And as part of those conversations that are being had within Congress and supporters of this legislation, they have tied this conversation to, well, the only way to do this is actually to acquire more data. And one of the ways in which we can sort of emulate this is by looking at EPP. So I think this is a conversation that I think organizations are going to have, whether or not they want to have it. And Liz, yes, I mean, their eyes are going to roll in the back of their minds, but in the back of their heads. But I think the reality is that there's no escaping this. And because we are witnessing, as the 21st century is transforming, we are witnessing the transformation to a digitally connected economy. So, and part and parcel of that is data. And if you don't have the right data, you're not properly managing your efficiencies and optimizing your processes.
No, absolutely. Bringing it back a little bit selfishly to standards and UPC and all of these different conversations that are happening worldwide. Can you share with us how UPCs and GS1 standards and standards in general are helping make this all successful?
I guess an analogy that I would use is, I mean, we're having a conversation now, so we're on the phone, but maybe a better yet, it could be texting, right? So we're all familiar with texting nowadays. I mean, I can send you a text and then you get the information, right? But I think, again, our audience right now is probably pretty familiar with the fact that, not so long ago, in many places, you could only text people that were within your carrier, right? And that was it. You were a prisoner of your carrier. You could only text that, right? So that's a pretty good analogy, I think, of where a lot of this is, right? So first of all, if you're texting somebody, you need a couple of things. So first of all, you need to have, different carriers need to be able to talk to each other so your text goes. Because if I text you, but my text doesn't go through, it doesn't matter what information I'm sharing. It doesn't matter what I'm saying to you, because you're never going to receive that. The second piece of that is we have to have a common language, right? So, I mean, chances are that if I text you in Hungarian, the likelihood of you understanding my text is very small. Now, I'm completely ignorant with whether or not you speak Hungarian, just assuming you don't. But so that's the second piece, and the third piece is actually a syntax. Now, let's assume that I can send you a text, and we're speaking the same language. But if I send you a text in English with completely mangled grammar, very likely you're not going to understand, or my idea is not going to completely get through. Right. And so that's a little bit of where the situation is with a lot of supply chains and a lot of sort of enterprise systems, where you have all these different actors that have data, but that data doesn't leave their network, doesn't leave their carrier, in if they're sending and shipping goods to somebody else. That data doesn't leave. When it does leave, oftentimes they can't read it. And if they can't read it, they can't properly decode it. Right. And this is where the standards are so important, because if you look for example at GS1 standards, you have something like let's assume GS1 Digital Link or UPC or something else. It actually provides you that carrier that allows you to transact with that data, and then you have additional standards like the TDS or UPCIS that allows you to actually make sense of the data that you get. You get everybody on the same language. You get everybody on the same syntax, so they can actually decode the data. And that's incredibly important, because that is what makes that data interoperable. And then what I'm telling you, and you can use that information to do something else with it, right? And if you look at, I'm going to refer back to the study I was mentioning on Rockwell, right? I mean, they were saying, okay, so phenomenal, 80% of you guys think that, supply chain digitization and serialization traceability is phenomenal, it's great, but what are the challenges that you're having? And if you look at the responses, 35% of surveyed people said, well, actually, there's a lack of standardization that's preventing us from moving forward with these initiatives. And 36% said, well, sure, there's standards, but then there's the problems with stitching those different pieces of data, right? So clearly a way to overcome those challenges, I mean, because 36% is not nothing. It's a very good chunk of, and my gut feeling is that is not higher because they don't know about it, right? They have a problem, they don't know they have the problem. And so that's why driving interoperability through commonly shared standards is really what empowers, maximizing the efficiency throughout the supply chain and what you can really use the data for.
Yeah, you brought up some really good points that they don't even know what they don't know yet, and they've been in a closed loop system. We talked about this a while back. There's some companies out there that are in closed loop systems. They make their own product, they sell their own product, they ship their own product. It's in a closed loop system. They can have a proprietary system, but once they want to move into this whole recycle, reuse, repurpose, and now that they need to move into, if they're in the EU, a digital product passport where they need to have data about not only where it came from, but where is it going. Just like a regular passport, right? I used mine last week. You know, you're coming from the United States, you're coming into Belgium. Where are you going? Well, you know, why are you going there, right? It's the same concept. That's why they call it a digital product passport. But now these companies that were in closed loops, it's okay. And now I need to share my raw data information, right? What raw materials came in. And now I need to share outside. Can it be recycled or can it not? That's going to go to a third party recycling organization, right? And so you have to kind of get involved with all this. I come from an IT background way back when, way before the texting was available. And then when the texting came out, I remember I'm like, oh, Liz is on Verizon, I'm on AT&T, I can't text her. And then when it became ubiquitous, right? I even remember being in a presentation where this person out of Xerox Palo Alto Research Center used the word ubiquitous computing. And this was in the early 90s. And thank goodness all my bosses were like, what the heck does that mean? But now we all know what it means, right? We really do. We don't even think about it. We come in. You go to an Airbnb today or a VRBO, and the first thing they show you when you get there is, here's the Wi-Fi username and password, right? Here's the setup. But that's a standard. And what shocks me today is, you know, Fritz, you were talking about syntax and common language, and you really hit the warmth of Liz's heart with data quality and all of that. But the number one, the top three things within C-level conversations today, you know, the C-suite, CEO, CFO, COO, CROs, you know, all of these folks, it's sustainability, automation. Those two come up in the top five of anyone. I mean, it's like those are the hot things. Well, guess what? If you're going to do anything around sustainability, you need to have a common language because you need to move with others that are not in your environment, right? And then if you want to do anything with automation, if you want to extend it outside your environment, it's the same thing. If you're a closed loop, you can write it in whatever language you want. But if you need to talk outside, I mean, the syntax was a great example. Even if we're all speaking English, but if you're speaking it from a perspective of Spanish or Portuguese or something else, you're going to put verbs in different spots and nouns in different spots. So the syntax is all off and we misuse our commas and such. So it's, you really nailed it. And I think we just all have to like warm up into this. I'd like to just change the direction here just a little bit. We have a standard here at GS1 called Digital Link. And it's rather new standard, but a lot of folks, you know, some are familiar, some aren't familiar. But if you're using a 2D barcode, a QR code, or, you know, any other type of 2D barcode, you can actually leverage Digital Link as a standard to embed information. Can you talk with the audience a little bit about your experience with it, how you're seeing it being used, and benefits that you're getting from this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're big supporters and proponents of the GS1 Digital Link. We have multiple, we have projects running on GS1 Digital Link. I think we have one, a very long-standing project. As soon as Digital Link came up, we started using it, and that this is I think a great example of where a lot of this is going, right? Because right now, a lot of the standards were predominantly enterprise-facing, and now we're moving more and more towards including the consumer and including users. I mean, not necessarily the consumer, but may need access to information within that data chain, right? And this is where it sort of connects back to DPP and maybe some other things that we may be seeing coming out here in the US. As part of DPP, DPP is not just about keeping that data within the enterprise, but it's also about making that data available to the user, in many ways the consumer, right? And they need to have a way to interact with the product and acquire some of that information, right? Now, depending on the industry, that may be a QR, maybe an RF, could be a combination of both, right? Depending on what the specific ag will dictate for that industry. But by and large, the expectation is GS1 Digital Link. Now, the question is why, right? So everybody here obviously is very familiar with the standards that GS1 puts out in terms of the barcode standards and how those operate within supply chains. But the digital link really takes it a step further, where what you can do is you have all those different application identifiers that you can leverage throughout the supply chain with the same GS1 barcode, whether it's a 128 or whether it is a 2D matrix or what have you, but really encapsulated in a web-enabled QR code, right? And we all know that obviously QR codes have been around for some time, but definitely the pandemic has, driven a lot more people to interact and understand what you can do with QR codes. And this is where, sort of going back to what has happened historically. I mean, you've sort of had, the barcodes for supply chain applications, and you had the barcodes for consumer engagement applications, right? And they just sort of occupy two different spaces, both on the packaging and both on the enterprise, spectrum. And what GS1 allows you to do is really combine those two options so that you really have one universal barcode that allows you to do all the transactions you want through the supply chain with all the application identifiers, but yet make it so that you can actually turn that into a point of contact with the consumer, or and just drive further connection throughout the supply chain, right? I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's really it's you nailed it. It's the webification of the technology. Before it was a UPC, right? Your 1D barcode, and here's the product. You have it programmed to a database, and here's the price, and it's all kind of internal. And now here's the manual on how to care and feed for that product. Here's how you correctly dispose of that product. Oh, by the way, here's a recall on that product, right? You can get it in the store or at home. Here's a coupon on that product, right? Different things. It just like the web, when we go to it, you can get directions, you can get content, you can get videos. All these things are now being enabled through this QR code, 2D type of, data transport, if you will. It's really quite amazing. I don't think they're the most beautiful thing to look at, but they have so much data behind them. I mean, it's really infinite. It's really quite cool. And now you don't have to come up with a new identification system. You can maintain the identification that you had. It maintains it globally. We're just like my background. We had data networks that didn't talk to one another. Then we made internet protocol. Now they all talk to one another. Then you layered wireless on top of that. Then you layered Bluetooth on top of that. Then you have near frequency communication, and we're going to have something else. And now we have wireless powering of these things as well. So it's just building off of it. It's really quite interesting to see.
GS1 Digital Link really will just close that data value chain, because you're going to be able to go all the way from production all the way through consumption through one single identifier that really aggregates the data throughout the entire supply chain, throughout the entire value chain. And so I think that final piece that's missing, that is going to come around in 2026, 2027 with GS1 Digital Link Sunrise being accepted at point of sale. I think it's going to be a turning point for how we engage with the products that we buy and consume every day.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And just to clarify on that, this GS1 US has a 2D barcode Sunrise coming up for 2027, where we're trying to move point of sale within industry. So when you go to checkout right now, everything is accepted with a 2D barcode, right? You go to grocery self-checkout or anywhere else. Thank you, Liz. It's a 1D barcode. I apologize. It's the UPC 1D barcode that is accepted everywhere, right? I mean, pretty much universal, ubiquitously, right? But now we need time for industry to change over those point of sale systems to have new types of scanners. Some of them have them ready today, and others don't, to be able to accept the 2D barcode. And we'll see packaging change. We're already seeing it today, but some packaging has a 2D barcode and a 1D barcode on it. And then a proprietary system too, we see with some brands. So we're constantly changing, constantly evolving as we need to. But Liz, I know we're kind of running out of time, and I know you had another question you wanted to get to.
Going back though to the digital product passport, and you talked about earlier these different commodities, or textiles and toys, from a technology perspective, is it is it static? Is it changing? What do you see in the future for the DPP?
That's a really interesting question. I think in the future of DPP, obviously, right now, I think we are, I would call it phase one, which is really the regulatory and enterprise implementation of the standard. I think phase two really is going to be being able to drive that consumer, um, or rather the user into the fold and being able to access that information. I think really that's how it's going to go. But I think really what we're going to assist in the future, right? Because right now, again, everybody has in their mind has like DPP sort of being EU centric. But as we discussed, I think that there's already being ripple effects where we're seeing DPP like programs being implemented in other places. I mean, I've certainly have heard of FISMA 204 being referred to as a DPP. I think is a inaccurate analogy, but I can understand where they're coming from with that, right? And obviously we're gonna have batteries, and then we also have the UFLPA here in the United States, where there are suggestions that DPP like system could be a valid way to support documentation that needs to be provided to customs at port of entry and to be able to aggregate information throughout the supply chain. So I think that the conversation is going to evolve over the years. I'm not quite sure that we have finished the conversation on data and technology, right? Because that conversation is going to evolve as data and technology evolves. In the same way that, probably we have UPCs 2.0 right now, but I think in a couple of years, we're probably going to have 2.5 or 3.0, right? And that's going to expand the data that we can actually share. And as that data and capabilities expand, obviously the envelope of what can be requested and what can be done is going to expand as well. But I think right now, a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises are laying the groundwork to be able to do some of that initial data capture and data sharing. I think that's going to be, it's a pretty heavy load. But I think it's going to be an evolving space, and I think we're going to see this being replicated in other markets. I mean, definitely, I think North America is next.
Yeah, no, those are very good points. And because there's constantly movement and flow and similarity, little differences. But I think what's nice is when we have this digital data, like I was just saying to my wife just last week, I'm like, I've been in technology for 30 years now, and it just blows my mind. I mean, like I transferred money, paid a mortgage, did some tax work, all this accounting work where you used to have to go to offices, right? And now you're doing it. And we have digital signatures now that we're accepting. I mean, DocuSign products, and the world has really changed, right? And we're going to continue to see more of this. And I think that there is a lot of similarity, but it's the same data for different reasons. But if we have that common language and syntax, we can send it across. Well, we're kind of getting towards the end of the show here. And Fritz, really appreciate the time that you're spending with us. But we always end our show with 2 questions that we ask all of our guests. And I'd like to start that with, what's your favorite technology that you're using right now? Could be for work, could be for personal use, pleasure, whatever it may be. But what's something that's just the technology is just really impressing you and you enjoy using it right now?
Yeah, so I think if you ask my coworkers, they would tell you our CRM. I'm like a CRM geek. I love it.
Which one are you using? Go ahead.
But
which one are you using?
So we're using Salesforce, but I think beyond that, I'll probably say my cell phone. I mean, it sounds kind of silly to say so, but I don't really do social media or anything like that. But I love I'm very data driven, and I love information, and so just being able to have basically the great library of Alexandria on my fingertips in my pocket anytime I want, I think it's just phenomenal. It's such a revolution.
It really is a true revolution. You don't think of it. I mean, back when we had Star Trek and all these shows, Beam Me Up, Scotty, we have that now. I mean, we have that and more in the palm of our hands. I mean, like everything I just talked about, you can do it all on your phone. You get it. I mean, to me, Google Maps just blows me away. I was in Belgium. I don't really speak the language there, and I'm just on the map, and it's like, oh yeah, 4.9 rating at this Belgian waffle store. Like, yes, I'm there. It's 0.2 miles away, right? I mean, everything's translated. It's just amazing. It really, truly is amazing, all the palm of your hand.
It's really cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask you our last question, which is, And all of this has blown my mind with the digital product passport and all of the data. But from your perspective, what has blown your mind, personal life or work life?
So, like, what I'm really excited right now, to be honest, over the last couple of years. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a fighter jet pilot, and then eventually transitioned to becoming an astronaut. Clearly, we can see how that worked out for me. But I've always followed up space exploration, and I think just the evolution of space exploration, like over the last decade, and even more so the last 5 years, the reduction in access cost, that to me, it's just blowing my mind, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen now in the coming years with the Artemis program. It's just, I'm absolutely taking it back, and I love it.
Yeah, it blows my mind that Elon Musk actually lands a rocket after he launches it on a barge in the ocean. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. Well, Fritz, you dropped some good knowledge on us. Really appreciate the debrief on digital product passports. I mean, they're looking backwards as well as looking forward. This is, really coming from an EU, European Union initiative, but we'll probably see similar things. And if you're selling products within the EU, you're going to need to be a part of it. So it's great to get ahead of this. It's starting with batteries right now. We'll be moving on to textiles and toys. And as we all have seen, once they kind of get the system down, then the scale starts to happen rather quickly. And I loved your story in the very beginning about where Kezzler came from, and not only just where Kezzler came from and the counterfeit bolts, which is just frightening, but happens a lot still today. We have counterfeit drugs and, lots of other things, and it's really scary. But your involvement and where you kind of came from, that was a really cool story. So thank you again for the time today. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and